for this first one coming back from our little mini break. We are thrilled. We're going to be talking about the new 3 R's for school counselors, the power of relationship, relevance, and resilience. It does not feel like 2020 is getting any easier yet. And so I think all this information is going to be very timely. And so we have a couple of resident experts here to kind of help out with this discussion. I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. My name is Jason Johnson. I am a school psychologist with the WhyTry organization. And I oversee training and research and development. I get to work with the greatest humans in the world throughout the country and love what I do. Today we are thrilled. We're going to be hearing from 2 really important people. The first is Miss Ashley Wright, who has become a good friend of us. She is a very passionate educator and student advocate. She currently works as a school counselor in Conroe ISD in Texas. She's been an educator for the past 13 years, currently, like I said, there with Conroe ISD. Recently received the 2019 Elementary School Counselor of the Year award for Texas School Counselor Association, currently serving on the TSCA board as an emerging leader. Last but not least, she loves counseling, and we are thrilled to have you here. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And then we have our founder, the founder of the WhyTry organization, Mr. Christian Moore, internationally renowned speaker, licensed clinical social worker, advocate for youth. He's the author of the book, The Resilience Breakthrough. He's the founder of the WhyTry program. And he's just an expert on the topic of resilience and really helping individuals work with kids and with grown-ups to tap in and find their own sources and skills of resilience. So we are thrilled to have Christian here with us as well. Welcome, Christian.
Good to be here. Good to be here.
I think what we're going to do today, we're going to kind of do this in a two-part system. So we're going to go for probably about an hour and 20 minutes today, just over an hour. For the first part, I think we're going to have Christian run through some of our resilience tools and a little bit about our model and how it kind of applies, I think, specifically to some of the circumstance we still find ourselves in 2020. I mentioned it's been a pretty rough year so far, and resilience, I think, is more important than ever. And then the second part, after we go through Christian's model, we're going to have a discussion, and Ashley's kind of really an expert, one of the best I've seen anywhere in the country at really taking social emotional learning and counseling strategies and resilience strategies and putting them into a really practical model that in my opinion, is one of the best I've seen that works in both a live and in a virtual setting. And a lot of us have found ourselves in that virtual model. And so we're going to kind of pivot over in the second half and have Ashley talk to us a little bit about how some of these strategies and concepts that Christian's going to share with us kind of apply in the real world and her perspective on that. So if that works, without further ado, I'm going to throw it over to Christian and let Christian kind of take it away.
All right. It's great to be back with everybody. I'm telling you, I've been on the road now for 4 months, so I miss everybody out there. And just even when I do one of these, I feel like I'm back out there traveling, visiting people, but I wish it was live and in person. I know right now people are craving that direct contact, and I'm definitely one of those people. I'm excited to be on here with Ashley. And Jason, you want to pop over, make sure I get this screen up here.
Yep.
I'm a social worker, so the technology is a little scary when I start doing it. But what I was saying is I'm really excited to be on here with Ashley. She's someone who takes it where the rubber hits the road and does some incredible direct practice to reach these kids here. So it's gonna hit share there, and I think
you're playing, you're golden.
And I think everybody can see my screen here now. All right, all right. So again, honor to be here with you, Ashley, and I really appreciate all you do to reach students. You know, I'm sometimes the big picture guy, but my big picture is not going to work unless we have that direct practice component that Ashley brings. So I'm excited. I also want to start out and say, you know, it's interesting when I speak on resilience across the country. People always ask me, what's the number one thing you have to be resilient? And I always say, you got to have something to bounce back from. Resilience is the ability to bounce back. You have to have suffering. Suffering is the number one ingredient in being resilient. You have to have something, again, to bounce back from. And right now with what's going on in this country with racial inequality issues, racial justice issues, COVID-19, and then, just the anxiety about going back to school, and so many things around going back to school is unsure. And the sacrifice I know that teachers, administrators are going to be making it is so important. And you guys are definitely, the work you're doing is so needed right now. And it's exciting to say, I just saw something the other day, they were saying they're going to consider teachers, essential workers. And I'm like, wait, y'all just considering that? They've always been the most essential workers on the planet. So I thought that was interesting. But again, teachers, counselors, social workers, man, we've always been essential workers. So I do have to put, hopefully somebody out there is listening to this. I'll have to share that on my podcast as well. But it's just so important what you guys are doing. So anyways, it's an honor to speak to you guys. So just, my goal here today is to just share with you a few tools on resilience. And then I want to talk a little about some of the racial justice issues a little bit as well, and kind of some solutions and some areas we need to look at around that. And I'm excited to have Ashley here as well as we talk about some of those issues. And I'll share a little model towards the end about that. And so that's kind of the goal here. And then we'll jump into some direct practice stuff there with Ashley. So I'm assuming most people out there have probably heard a little bit about my background. There's a few new people out there. So I'll just kind of give you a Reader's Digest version, how I got interested in resilience and my own personal story a little bit. I grew up in between DC and Baltimore in Maryland there, in a family of 12 kids, 5 brothers, 6 sisters. My mom got married really, really young, had me and an older sister, got a divorce. She met a man who had 6 kids, whose wife had just left him with 6 kids, never came back, meets my mom. They have 4 more kids, a total of 12 kids. My mom had something called social phobia, generalized anxiety disorder. My mom had a fear of leaving the house. So there wasn't a lot of food to eat in my house growing up. There's usually pickles, olives, and tuna fish. You have to, get out of the house to go get groceries. And that was even a challenge sometimes growing up. And then my dad was, believe it or not, was a code breaker at the National Security Agency at NSA. It was a GS-16 code breaker with autism. And as a child, I was diagnosed with ADHD, conduct disorder, severe learning disabilities. And all of us in this house, between my parents' mental health issues, my diagnosis as a child, some of my other siblings had similar diagnoses. There wasn't a lot of rules growing up in my house. I grew up as a street kid. I'd be out till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning on a school night. I'd hang out with kids my own age till 5, 6 o'clock at night, but most kids my age had to go in the house pretty early, so I'd run around with the older kids. I got quickly introduced to the urban pharmaceutical industry. Because I was a white kid with curly hair and dimples, the older kids would put all the drugs on me because they knew I would never be checked. And, as I for the last, 20 years, I've been able to speak out about racial injustice issues and get involved in this type of work. And people always ask me, where did you get interested? Why did that, how did that start for you? And especially at a young age, I'd be out late at night, the police would roll up. The older kids would put all the drugs on me because they knew I wouldn't be checked. I'd run over and talk to the police. And the police would hand me football cards and take me home, professional football cards with the Washington football team. I'm very glad that the Redskins are realizing they should not be using that word that I just said, and that they're changing that name. Hopefully today, even there's some rumors, or this week sometime, that will be fixed. And so they would hand me these football cards and take me home. And, the police never checked me. So by the time I was 7 years old, I hope everybody catches that age, 7 years old, I became highly, highly aware of racial injustice issues and all kinds of challenges around that at a very, very young age. I know that's one of the things that inspired me to become a social worker, do some of the work I'm doing around the world. Well, one night I'm out late at night and a car pulls up And the windows on the car slowly roll down, and I hear a voice, and the voice I hear is the voice of this woman right here who I endearingly call Mama Jackson. There's a picture of her. She sees me out there in the middle of the night. She knows what I'm out there doing. And she's like, look, Christian, don't you ever set foot on our property. I'm going to call the school tomorrow. I'm going to make sure you're not in any of Sean's classes. And I remember thinking to myself, dang, I know I'm bad, but I'm not that bad. I can never hang out with him ever again. And you can see me, there's me and my Washington football team jacket there. We gotta get a name though. A football club, the Washington Football Club. And there's my buddy Sean. He was actually a Dallas Cowboys fan at the time. I don't know what was wrong with him. And but anyway, Sean luckily explained to his mom the reality of my home life, what was going on in my house, and why I was out there late at night. And a couple of days later, I'm walking to school, and Mama Jackson comes flying out of her house in this blue bathrobe. And she's like, I'll tell you what, Christian, if you'll start going to school every day, I want to see your report cards. If you start answering to me, you can come eat in our house anytime you want. And Mama Jackson's a seriously, seriously good cook. That's the real reason why I'm in top physical condition right now. So it's pretty much an informal foster care situation. She took over and helped raise me. And I wish I had time to tell the whole story, but basically she helped give me the tools to graduate from college with a 6th grade math level, a 7th grade reading, writing level. And she used to pull over in front of my elementary school. She'd have this green plate with warm food on it, wrapped in tinfoil. And she would say, look, Christian, I can't get rid of the challenges at home, the challenge in this community, your problems in school. You have every reason to be angry, but you have to use this anger as a reason to turn in your homework, to stay in school, to not give up. So she didn't get rid of my problems. She showed me how to take my emotional state in that moment and be productive with it. So to say I was lucky to have her come into my life is an understatement. You know, because of Mama Jackson now, we've reached, you know, literally over, you know, almost now close to 3 million students across the country. We're in over, now I was told recently almost 30,000 organizations now are using WhyTry. We would never had this opportunity without the tremendous impact that Mama Jackson had in my life. And recently, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Virgil Wood read my book, The Resilience Breakthrough, learned about Mama Jackson and what we're doing across this country and stuff. And he said, look, you never would have had the chance to do this. Now, Dr. Virgil Wood, let me tell you who he is. He's good friends. That's the wrong picture. Let me see if I can pull it up over here. I think I have it here on this other slide here. I think it's right here. Let me see here. If I can pull it up here. Here he is. So there's Dr. Wood there on the left of Dr. King. So he helped plan the march on Washington with Dr. King. He was the representative for the state of Virginia. And many of you probably seen him. He's in lots of photographs, kind of standing next to Dr. King there in those glasses there. And so he's just right there to the left. And again, his name's Dr. Virgil Wood. Read my book, learned about what we were doing, and said, look, Christian, you never would have done this, had these opportunities without Mama Jackson. So about 2 years ago, outside of Washington, D.C., they gave her the National Rosa Parks Award. And that was an unbelievable experience, amazing thing to see that. And so, you know, when I remember being a little boy and sitting in school, and my teacher, elementary school teacher, the first time I learned about Dr. King, lit a candle, and Dr. King's silhouette was on the candle as this glass candle, and then it's kind of this oval on the side of the candle with Dr. King's picture. She turned out the lights, and then she told us about Dr. King and showed video and showed him speaking and the fire hoses and all the different issues going on. I remember sitting there as a child going, wow, why would we treat each other like that? There's no difference. We're all the same human beings. We're just people. Like, why would we treat another human being like that? And I remember as a child trying to process that. And I spent the rest of my life kind of studying civil rights history, and I've always been obsessed, fascinated by it. And I never dreamed in a million years I'd even get to, you know, meet someone from that world and dip my toe and have the opportunity to be around the civil rights movement, even in a small way, and participate in it, even in a very small way. That it's been one of the most incredible highlights of my life. So again, I have a huge debt to pay with these type of mentors and people who came into my life and made a huge difference for me. So many of you know the WhyTry story. I graduated from high school at 19 and a half, almost 20 years old. It takes me to get my high school diploma. And I fall in love with this beautiful girl named Wendy, but I'm thinking, how am I going to support her? How am I going to be able to do anything with my life? Several years later, I start dating her and stuff in my, about 22 years old or so. And I'm just like, man, there's no way I can make a livable wage. And even several years later, I'm 28 years old. I don't even make over $6 an hour. And I break up with Wendy, and I'm like, Wendy, you got to marry one of these functional people in society, someone who can make a living and thrive and have different skills than I have. And Wendy actually proposed to me and said, Christian, if you marry me, you'll never have to get a job. I'll support you. I'll take care of you for the rest of your life. And I thought to myself, I may be learning disabled, but this homeboy ain't stupid. That is the woman for me. And so I married her because I really did love her, not because I never had to work another day in my life. But she's taken advantage of me because I've traveled 7 million miles around the planet. Often, many weeks, I work over 100 hours a week with my nonstop energy and ADHD. So again, I think she took great advantage of me. And no, I'm just kidding. And so Wendy says to me, why don't you apply to the local, college? I get accepted. I'm jumping up and down on the couch. And she's like, Christian, it's open enrollment. They let everybody in. And a professor, and actually that's another social justice issue. I wish I had more time to talk about. Jason's going to tackle me if I go off on too many subjects. But I didn't know the requirements to go to college was a GED and all D minuses. I thought you had to have math, foreign language, take the ACT. I thought there was all these, I didn't understand that higher education was a business. If you hand them money, they'll work with you. And that's another workshop I'm not gonna get in today. But basically, that's a long social justice issue, but hopefully we can change that in this country. But I'm getting all off on different stories here. But basically, I have a professor that comes to me in college after I'm there for a few years and says, look, Christian, how did you make it this far in school with your background, with your learning disabilities and stuff? And actually, here's a picture of Dr. Wood and Mama Jackson when she got the Rosa Parks Award there. But this professor's like, Christian, how did you do this? How did you make it this far in school with your background, with your learning disabilities? And that's where I wrote down some of the principles in WhyTry. I wrote down I had to stop crashing. I'm not going to go into any depth here, but I had to tear off my labels. I had to learn how to control my defense mechanisms. When I was in school, the teacher would say, Christian, turn to page 130 and read out loud. I didn't know how to read, so I'd swear at the teacher or punch the kid next to me because I'd rather be sent to the principal's office for acting out behaviorally than having 30 kids laughing at me because I don't know how to read. And so anyways, this picture is a tribute to my home state of Maryland. If you put a bunch of live crabs in a pot, if you don't put a lid on the pot, why can't the crabs get out of the pot? And the kids will say, well, duh, the other crabs are reaching up and pulling them down. So I'll say, hey, your friends, you're skipping school with, you're doing drugs with, gang banging, they're just pulling you down and keeping the pot. So anyways, I create these 10 visual metaphors. We reinforce them with music, physical activities, and we saw a lot of success teaching these social and emotional skills to kids. But after we reached about 2 million kids, I noticed, about half of these kids we really succeeded with. We saw tremendous change and incredible stuff. And then many of these kids, the other half of these kids, thousands of teachers and counselors would pull me aside and say, look, Christian, kids understand your visual metaphors, reinforce the music, but some kids have the inner motivation to apply these skills, and other kids have no desire to apply desire, time, and effort to lift society's laws and rules, to create these connections, to get plugged in, to see over this wall right here. And they said, Christian, you can teach this stuff all day long. And again, a group of kids will thrive after they learn these skills. And there's this other huge demographic that won't. And they started asking me the toughest question I've ever been asked. They would say, well, where does the inner motivation come from to get on top of this wall or to stop crashing or to tear off their labels? And I had a beautiful speech for about, 8 to 10 years. I would say I got this question all across America, and I had the same answer. I would say, well, all you can do is teach kids life skills, because what motivates her is not going to motivate him. My responsibility as a social worker, as an educator, as a teacher, is to teach the skills. I can't control if they're motivated to apply the skills. And there's no prescription for the inner motivation for these children. And so I would push back pretty hard on that. And the greatest thing happened to me was some brilliant counselors, educators pushed back on me and said, well, have you ever stopped to try to really answer that question? And they said, why don't you really think about where does resilience come from within? You know, I saw the 20-year longitudinal study, the Kauai Resiliency Project, and they found, you know, 2 kids grew up in the same home, the same neighborhood, the same background. One child makes it out, the other child doesn't make it. You know, what's the X factor? And they found that one of the biggest X factors was this ability to see your problem as your best friend, was the ability to be resilient. So when I saw that data, I was like, man, why don't we teach people resilience? But even some of my professors in graduate school said, you can't just hand someone resilience. Either they have it or they don't have it. You can't. There's not a prescription for it. And this was like, you know, almost, you know, 30 years ago. And so that was always on the back of my mind. And they would, you know, my professor said, all you can do is teach kids life skills, just kind of like what I was regurgitating. You can just teach life skills. The inner motivation has to come from within. And so, you know, I was doing work all across this country, you know, in every state. I was doing work in inner city Baltimore, to Detroit, to LA Unified, to Los Angeles. And a couple of years ago, I started thinking to myself, why don't we pay attention to people who have high trauma and are high flyers? Because someone like me as a social worker, I only work with people who have high trauma and are oftentimes giving up, hurting themselves or others, and you come into me into therapy, right? Because you're in crisis. So I said, all right, I know there's these populations that, you know, and I've met literally thousands of these kids. Mom's in prison, dad's an alcoholic, their older brother abused them. I remember meeting with a couple of young men in Baltimore in that situation, and they had like scholarships to Johns Hopkins. And I was like, what the crap are those kids tapping into? Does that make sense? And I didn't realize when I started doing this study and kind of looking at this, some incredible counselors started pulling me aside and going, Christian, you're one of those kids. That's why you're so blinded. You did it. You can't even see what you did because it's your life. Does that make sense? You're too close to it. So I had to kind of observe it in these other kids. And I was like, all right, so this kid is dealing with major abuse, major trauma. He's in this very difficult challenge. He's in this impoverished neighborhood, but this kid is angry. This kid is depressed. This kid's angry. But the one thing this kid's not doing is shutting down. They're actually taking their negative emotions and creating a productive outcome with it. Now, that might not sound that significant to you, but that blew me out of the water because I had spent my entire career studying positive psychology, that to be productive, to overcome something, we have to have positive thoughts, right? We have to have positive psychology. Is, you know, that's, you go to any graduate school across this country, the number one thing they're going to start teaching is positive psychology. And I started reading hundreds of biographies, and I started highlighting the minute a person started to change. And it blew me out of the water because I started noticing when people started making changes, they would feel angry, sad, nervous. If you have a crisis in your life, when you're dealing with suffering, when you're dealing with pain, you know, the natural emotion that kicks in is going to be negative. And that what I started realizing is there's no law in the universe that says you cannot take a negative emotion and create a productive outcome with it. And that's why my book is called The Resilience Breakthrough. That's the breakthrough. We started figuring out, what if we showed kids by 3rd grade, the minute they feel sad, angry, nervous, or afraid, or lonely, or if they feel isolated or discriminated against, that they can literally take those negative emotions and create productive things with them. And now that was a theory. The question is, could we do it? And one thing I'm very proud of, we've literally taught tens of thousands of children now. Hopefully we'll reach by the end of this year, hundreds of thousands and then millions of kids. We're going to show them exactly what to do with their negative emotions. And I also want them to maximize their positive emotions as well. But let me show you how we kind of go about doing that. Let me give you a little more insight into the resilience here. We do it on time. So if I was going to pass away tomorrow and someone said to me, what's the last advice you would give your 2 boys, Cooper and Carson? I would tell them the second most powerful thing their dad ever learned in life was this right here, is resilience. The ability to see my problem, what Mama Jackson did when she sat me down and said, look, Christian, I can't get rid of your parents' mental illness. I cannot get rid of your learning disabilities. I cannot get rid of your non-stop talking. She had no idea. She goes, I don't know what you're gonna do. All you do is talk. That's the only skill you have, Christian, is talking. Well, luckily, you can make a living talking. And so they sent me to the principal's office every 5 minutes for my nonstop talking. But here's the problem. When I was a child, every other word out of my mouth was the F word. My nonstop talking was to disrespect you. My nonstop talking was bullying. My nonstop talking was anger. Does that make sense? And so the question is, there's no law in the universe that says you cannot take whatever the attribute is and create it in a productive way. So so I would tell my kids the second most powerful thing their dad ever learned is the ability, how do we use these deficits, quote deficits, I don't know if I believe they're deficits now, that's another workshop, but how do we take these challenges we're having and channel them in productive ways? How do you see your problem as your best friend? That's the ability to see your problem or the suffering or the opposition as a fuel source to create good works. That's the most powerful thing anybody's ever taught me. It's the second most powerful thing anybody has ever taught me. And when I went to my publisher, Greenleaf, and I said, hey, I want to name the book Resilience, the Second Greatest Principle in the World, I'll never forget this conversation. They literally laughed their head off at me. They said, Christian, nobody cares what the second greatest principle in the world is. In America, what do they want to know? Number one, right? That's all we care about. What's the number one principle in the world? And it's funny, when I figured out what the number one principle in the world is, and I started sharing this, in the last couple of years, I've literally shared this with hundreds of thousands of people across the United States. I thought, man, I'm going to get some pushback on this. What I'm about to share with you, which is the number one principle in the world, I've gotten this much pushback, 0. And this shouldn't shock anybody. So if the ability to see your problem as your best friend is the second greatest principle, the greatest principle, the Beatles got it right when they said, all you need is love. Love is the most powerful thing I've ever come across. The love I have for my children, my wife, Wendy, the kids I'm able to advocate for across this country. Love is the most powerful thing. And you think about it, I think we're going to know this now more than anything coming out of, as we got a lot of work before we come out. We're going to come out of COVID-19 far faster than we're going to come out of the racial justice issue. But if you think about it, both of those issues, we see with COVID-19, people being isolated and not connecting with other human beings, the impact that's having on people is unbelievable. So that love, that connection, community with other people, that debate is over. I mean, I wasn't even getting the debate before that love was the most powerful thing, but coming out of COVID, no doubt that's going to be the biggest X factor. And then if we look at it from a racial justice issue, people like me, all of us, I think that for us to create healing in this world, particularly the white community, has to come out with love and healing. And we have to, be, every day I try to ask myself, what resources do I have that I can share with my brothers and sisters, especially my African-American and brown brothers and sisters? Like, what resources do I have that I can share? But what's going to motivate the white community, any community, to do this, it's going to have to start with love. And that, and vice versa. And that love has to go both ways. Mama Jackson was unconditional with me. When I was a little white boy in her home, we'd play football in the streets. And when I would get done playing football, and I would go, I was the only white kid that would walk into a black home, all the kids in the neighborhood would call me an N lover. And they would say, hey, why do you go hang out with those African-American people? Da, 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 da. And so I would get this constantly as a child. Now, I remember looking at these white kids thinking, man, if they only knew at what level Mama Jackson loved me. And being a white kid, one thing I love about the African-American community is very unconditional with each other. It's an unconditional love that I did not experience in the white community. And so in the white community, it was much more conditional love. I'll love you if you jump through these hoops, you have certain success, you follow our belief system, our culture, our community. But in the African-American community, I learned very early that they were able to love me unconditionally, despite my learning disabilities, despite my challenges, despite my beliefs. It was an unconditional love that changed my life. And that's something that I wish everybody in this world could understand. Let me be very clear, the white community has the ability to do that as well. I'm just saying I personally experienced it far more in the African-American community and realized, wow, if we could just create an environment where people could figure out how much internal love we really can have for each other. But that love has to be unconditional love. See, what's interesting in the world of resilience, we know there's two types of love, right? We have conditional love. As a business owner, I have to be conditional. If my employees don't do A, B, or C, I'm gonna have to fire them. It's a conditional situation, right? So if you want status, money, power, control, dominance over people, create a conditional type of love. I'll love you if ... You have my view, my belief, my skin color, my culture, my tribe, my background. Then we can have this love. That's conditional love. And I would argue that that love does not motivate people to bounce back. That type of love will never work through racial justice issues. The only type of love that will solve racial justice in this country and work through these issues is going to be unconditional love. Is the love that Mama Jackson gave to me as a child and the love I was able to give back to her. That's the love that will solve hate in this country. And it also has to come from exposure. Now, let me tell you, I could be a hater if I was not raised by it, if I spent no time in the African-American community, was not exposed to it. It's easy to hate. And one of the biggest things that causes us to work through these issues is unconditional and exposure. You say, okay, Christian, how do we really work on these racial injustice issues? We have to have more exposure to each other. We got to spend more time with each other. And we have to have that unconditional love. And conditional love will continue to create divisiveness. And we have to really, really work. And I'll come back to that towards the end of this. Sorry if I got on a little tangent there, but I just get worked up sometimes. I apologize. No, I don't apologize for that. What am I saying? It's important. See, that's socialization. See, all these years, the reason we don't work through these problems, because I'm feeling fear talking about these things. If I'm feeling fear talking about them, we're not going to work through them. So we do have to have these brave conversations and put it on top of the table. And so unconditional love creates an environment where a human being is way more likely to bounce back and push through and not give up in an unconditional environment. And so every day when I wake up, I try to, every conversation I have with someone, that whether it's with my kids, my wife, if I'm doing advocacy work in the African-American community, or today I was on the phone with some pretty powerful political leaders, a dean of a university, and we were talking about racial justice issues and all kinds of complex stuff. And I had to take a risk. It's out of that love. We have to knock down these barriers, but it has to start with love. Okay, so, and again, if I want money, power, and control, all I have to do is create an unconditional environment. Everybody with me on that? So pay attention. You can even write down all the relationships you have. And if that relationship is predicated upon you jumping through their hoops, through some type of obedience, jumping through their hoops, you're probably in a conditional situation. Does that make, so I do this a lot. I've literally gotten hundreds of emails from people that said, oh my gosh, I realized that most of my relationships were conditional. And if you can create more unconditional relationships in your life, you'll feel safer, you'll feel supported, you'll feel free to express yourself, you'll feel more freedom of speech, you'll feel more empowered. But if more of the conversations you have with people are predicated upon regurgitating their worldview, that is not a safe situation. And we have to start being aware of this, and we have to start speaking out. So the first thing you have to be resilience is you have to have suffering. The second thing you have to be resilient is you have to say to yourself, we call this the flip the switch question. How do I use this suffering as my best friend? And then we want to be around as many unconditional people as we can to create that inner motivation. And so in the book, I define resilience as it's the ability to bounce back when you have every reason. Sorry, just jumped ahead of me here. All right, here we go. All right, one more back here. Sorry about that. The ability to bounce back when you have every reason to shut down, but you fight on. Resilient people have both tapped and untapped reserves, enabling them to overcome and thrive as they face setbacks, challenges, and fears of daily life. You know, what I mean by untapped reserves is again, I was alluding to it a few minutes ago. I had 2 skills growing up. I could talk nonstop. I could draw really good. So, today I make a living by talking nonstop, taking everything in mental health, making it visual for kids. Again, that got me in trouble as a child. Today is the greatest resource in my life. I wouldn't get rid of my nonstop talking in a million years. Now, Jason, who's listening to me right now, who's heard me speak 1,000 times, he is thinking the opposite, I promise you. And then, so let me bounce over here to, here we go. So I mentioned earlier, I spent 8 years in college, $65,000 being trained in something called positive psychology. And as I started reading tons of biographies, I started noticing that there was a moment, they had a crisis, they had a major challenge, and they would flip the switch. There was a moment they would flip the switch and they would say to themselves, how can I use this problem? How can I use this suffering? How can I use this rejection? How can I use this hate? How can I use this anxiety as a reason not to give up? And I started realizing there's this other fuel source. So it's just like flipping this gas pump right here. You're able to tap into this fuel source below. One of the first books I started realizing this was I was reading Christopher Reeve's biography. He played Superman. He's the opposite of me. He's tall, dark, handsome. He's in perfect physical condition. He was this great athlete, great actor. Everybody knows the story. He gets thrown off the horse. He's paralyzed. He says to his wife, I cannot go on. I was at the top of the world. Now I'm rock bottom. There's no way I can deal with the pain of this. I want to give up. Can you please help me commit suicide? And she negotiates with him and says, look, Christopher, just stay alive for the kids. Let's see if you can make a difference in the paralysis community. If you still feel like this in a few months, we'll really look at it. But look, I just need you to hang in there right now. And everybody knows the rest of the story. Christopher Reeves hangs in there and he takes his anger, his pain, his suffering, and he channels it into his rehab. He makes a huge difference in the paralysis community. He becomes a great inspiration. And in the book, he just talks about his anger, his depression, the pain he had, and then how he took that pain and created a productive outcome with it. I remember just highlighting that book going, wait a minute, there's no law in the universe that says you can't do this. I started realizing this is a learned skill. You don't even have to be born with the insight on how to do this. You just have to learn it. And to say I got a little excited is an understatement. I remember I was reading Oprah's biography. She was severely emotionally abused, physically abused, sexually abused. And Oprah talked about the anger, the rage, and how she took that and she was going to change this world. She used that anger, that rage to create healing, and the rest is history. Nelson Mandela took 27 years of being in the prison camp, and he talked about, how the guards treated him and the mistakes, and he learned from his past mistakes, and that he was going to, bring reconciliation because of that. And I started realizing, wait a minute, these emotions, most of my life I've dealt with these emotions. Those that know me know I have a severe anxiety disorder. So I battle anxiety every single day. And every day I talk to the anxiety. I say, all right, you're going to go on this walk with me. You've been here. I've been on this earth 50 years. In 50 years, this anxiety has never not been with me. So me and Mr. Anxiety, we walk together every day. So instead of me fighting my anxiety, if I fight my anxiety, I'm 100 times more likely to have a panic attack. If I walk hand in hand with my anxiety, I'm more likely to be able to have just a better day that day. Now, it's still going to be hard. I'm still going to be at war with this anxiety. My mom, again, it's very genetic in my family. My mom couldn't leave the house because of anxiety. I just found out my 2 uncles on my biological dad's side could not leave the house. So on both sides of my family, I have people with very severe anxiety disorders. And so every day I have to take that negative emotion, that negative pain that comes from anxiety. And by the way, anxiety just passed up depression is the #1 disorder, mental health disorder in the US. The 2 biggest things we're seeing with is anxiety and loneliness. Those are 2 things we've got to battle as a country right now. And after COVID and what's going on in this country, I'm sure anxiety is as high as it has ever been in US history. And so I've been talking about this for years, and then, oh my goodness, what's going on now? So the first thing you have to be resilient is you have to have suffering. The second thing we have to do is ask ourselves, how do we use the suffering as our best friend? That's the question, to flip the switch. Until you ask yourself that question, it's pretty hard to start kicking in that resilience. And then we want to be able to channel both our positive and negative emotions. So let me share with you how I teach this to children. I use a metaphor here of a battery, a car battery. And I say, look, can you charge this battery with a positive connection only? And the kids will look at that and go, no, you cannot charge a battery with just a positive connection. I say, can you do it with just a negative connection? The students will usually say no. I say, what enables the battery to charge is the positive and the negative coming together. For example, if me being here right now and talking to you all was dependent upon these emotions right here, over here on the positive side, you know, happiness, peace, motivation, optimism, love, trust, and acceptance. You know, I didn't have a lot of these growing up until Mama Jackson came into my life. You know, I'm here talking to you guys today actually because of the emotions on the right-hand side of the screen: anger, fear, guilt, sadness, regret, loneliness, anxiety, depression. It's those emotions, and having some incredible mentors, incredible people showing me how to create a productive outcome with those emotions. So again, about 8 years ago, when I started studying kids and families who had high trauma that were bouncing back, I kept noticing over and over again, when people had high trauma and were high flyers, they had the ability to take their negative emotions and create a productive outcome with them. And they would just, it was almost like a natural thing. They would be like, well, why would you not do that? I remember having this conversation one time with my grandfather. He was shot down out of a plane during World War II, was in a prison camp for a year. And when he was in this German prison camp, he was a bombardier, you know, he goes to this prison camp to get shot down. And he's noticing that a lot of the US soldiers are shutting down, having lots of mental health problems. So he just said to these soldiers, look, from 8 to 9 in the morning, I want you to put all the dirt from the right-hand side of your cell to the left-hand side of your cell, because then these little small cells most of the day. And he was like, man, this is not good. And then from 10 to 11, I want you to put the dirt to the other side of your cell in the other corner. And then from like 11 to 12, I want you to lay down, close your eyes, and I want you to drive around your hometown. I want you to take your girlfriend on a date. I want you to go visit your parents, but I want your brain not to shut down. You have to stay active. And so what my grandfather was doing there was just trying to show him, look, we're in this horrible situation. We're in these tiny cells, but we're literally going to plan every moment of our day. And then the Red Cross would bring rations in. And he told all the US soldiers they would get 2 cigarettes, you know, and he would say, I want you to trade with the other soldiers from around the world for the bread. And because we got to take care of our physical body as well and all this stuff. And he just planned out, he's been the Grand Marshal in a bunch of 4th of July parades and just an incredible person. But I was sharing with him this concept here of channeling positive, negative emotions. And he kind of looked at me stunned. He goes, we're not already teaching kids that? And I said, no, we actually spend most of the time just teaching kids positive psychology. We only focus on the only thing that has value is positive emotions. Now we have like 45,000 different emotions during the day. And some of those emotions are going to be positive. Some of those emotions are going to be negative. You're actually at a resilient disadvantage if you have to wait for positive emotions to show up before you make good decisions, before you put effort in. You're actually at a resilience disadvantage. You actually have double the energy, double the fuel to bounce back if you can tap into both your positive, negative emotions. You know, I was speaking a couple years ago close to the University of Iowa, and there were some professors from the humanities department, and they pulled me aside and they said, Christian, you don't even understand your own model. I said, what do you mean? They said, you realize that at everybody's funeral, usually what we talk about at someone's funeral is what they did with their negative emotions. And they said, hey, look, some of the greatest literature, the greatest music, the greatest literature, the greatest art is people taking their negative emotions and creating a productive outcome with it. The greatest comedians, the greatest plays, from Les Mis to Wicked to you name all these plays. What are people doing? They're taking pain, they're taking suffering, and they're creating a productive outcome. At Hemingway's work, you know, Picasso did those paintings, those abstract paintings during the war there in Spain. He's seen lots of people in his country killed, and he was angry, and he put it into this artwork that's worth billions of dollars. And it was interesting. These professors said to me, look, do you realize what you're talking about, Christian, is the birthplace of humanity? It's what makes us human is that we mess up, we make mistakes, we have negative emotions. We would be like a robot. We would be like a machine if we only had positive emotions all day. What is most special about us is that we make mistakes, we mess up, we feel sad, we feel angry, we have to be vulnerable. The only way we get close to other human beings is to be honest and to tell other people, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling anxiety, I'm feeling depression. That's what creates closeness, that creates intimacy. You know, when you're around someone that's fronting, like their life is perfect, I have no problems, I'm on top of the world, everything's perfect, you can't get close to them. It's one of the, that's why we can be with other people and experience complete loneliness even when we're with other people, because there's no vulnerability. And this is what Brene Brown's work is about, and the most watched podcast, and I mean the most watched TED Talk, where she talks about this. And now don't hear me wrong. People will say, well, Christian, we need to emphasize positive. I think positive is 50% of the equation. I tell every child, any positive emotion you have, I want you to maximize it. I want you to build on it. It's just that we live in a world that spends 90% of their time focused on positive emotions, and that's the only thing that has value. But when we look at what causes humans to do some of the greatest contribution, what causes the greatest amount of connection with other people, what makes us special is our flaws, our mistakes. That is what is special about human beings. Perfection is the most non-human thing out there. Does that make sense? There's nothing special in any type of perfection. That is so non-human, it's unbelievable. And what makes us special, what makes us close, is having challenges, having mistakes, learning from them, and increasing our resilience. Our resilience is born within the context of the suffering, of having these challenges, having these difficulties. So it's interesting, in psychology today, we realize that all emotions create energy, whether they're positive or negative. Psychology is becoming less and less concerned whether an emotion is positive or negative. By the way, when I speak at universities and psych departments will pull me aside and say, Christian, stop it. Don't talk about emotions as positive or negative. There's no such thing as positive, negative emotions. There's just emotional states. And to be human is just to have emotions. And they get it. They know I work with children. So it's easier for a child to understand that we have emotions that make us feel good and make us feel bad. But just as adults, we should all know that to have negative emotions is normal as drinking water. It's as normal as breathing in oxygen. It's just part of the human condition. There's nothing wrong with you if you have negative emotions. Now, if you're hurting yourself or others with those emotions, then you need intervention. You might need to talk to a counselor. You may need medication. But to have emotional states, there's no such thing as positive, negative emotions. It's just a human condition. Everybody with me on that's a deeper concept there. But again, when I speak across the country, the academic world kind of confronts me on that pretty hard. And they say, Christian, be really careful talking about emotions as being positive and negative. They're just emotional states. And so think about the resilience advantage you have. You can double your ability to bounce back if you can tap into both positive and negative emotions. And it's interesting, on my tombstone, this is going to be the quote on my tombstone. It's going to say, there's no law in the universe that says you cannot take a negative emotion and create a productive outcome. I think the number one thing a child needs to understand is love. They need to be exposed to love. They need support. They need that unconditional love. The second thing children need to understand is when they feel sad, angry, or nervous, or they feel lonely or afraid, there's nothing wrong with them. Every human being feels these emotions. We live in a world that will not celebrate negative emotions at all. We will demonize negative emotions, and that's a hustle. We have to start telling children the truth, that to have these emotions is as normal as breathing in oxygen. I know I keep repeating myself on that, but it's so important. So it's awesome to see children. I've seen children young as 3rd grade, and they'll be dealing with, all these intense emotions, and they'll learn that there's nothing wrong with them when they have these negative emotions. And you can see the weight of the world come off their shoulders when they realize it's just part of the human condition, that they feel sad, hurt, or angry. But if you want power and control over people, tell them something's wrong with them if they experience certain emotions, and you can really, it's not healthy what we do to people. So we got to really, really help people understand it's okay to feel the gamut of emotions. That's what makes you special. So it's one thing to tell a child and a family, we want you to channel both your positive and negative emotions, but here's the big question. Where does the inner motivation come from to do that? And there's 4 places. When I started looking at people with high trauma that were bouncing back, we kept seeing these 4 things pop up over and over again. I'm gonna give you a Reader's Digest version of each one of these. The first thing that we saw is something called relational resilience. So this is where resilience comes from within. And this is what my professors told me in college we'll never, ever figure out is where resilience comes from internally. So the first place it comes from, and there's an incredible amount of research around this one, and that's called relational resilience. For example, these are my 2 boys, Cooper and Carson. If I never, ever got invited to speak again, I would go work at 4 different fast food restaurants because they need me, I need them. That makes me relationally resilient. So it just means your greatest motivation to not give up is the knowledge that others need you and you need them. That interdependence. I'm not talking about codependence, interdependence. The more human beings need each other, the more likely they are to push through and not give up. It's interesting. I work in lots of prisons across the country, and I'll ask teachers, you know, write down 3 people, or I'm sorry, write down 5 or more people that need you and you need them. 90% of educators across America often will write down 10 or more people where they have that interdependence with. When we ask inmates that question, they usually write down 1 or less. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason they're incarcerated, but we know that is a major, major X factor. We know human beings are motivated by other human beings, and that has definitely been proven during COVID-19 when we're seeing all the research, all the stuff coming out of that, how it's impacting people emotionally. That debate is over. We are highly social creatures, and we need that social interaction. You realize that your greatest power comes from human connection. You know, Mama Jackson was that relationship for me. One of my favorite examples is Dick and Rick Hoyt, who ran in over 240 triathlons together. He says when he became the legs for his son, it completely transformed his life. You know, Harriet Tubman, powerful example of relational resilience. We know she freed over 200 slaves on the Underground Railroad. You know, I grew up in Maryland where the Underground Railroad went through. It was in my Maryland history books, but they never told me the real story until I went to her museum, and it literally blew me out of the water when I went to her museum. The slaves would want to turn back around. They would hear the dogs coming towards them, the lights coming towards them through the woods. And Harriet Tubman would explain to them, if you turn around, we're all going to get captured. And the real story is she had a shotgun there, and she'd say, look, I'm going to have to shoot you before you turn around because we're all going to get captured. And not one slave turned around for some reason. They all continued to go with her. And she did not lose one slave on the Underground Railroad. She's the grandmother of my profession, social work. Jane Addams is the mother of social work who started the Whole Houses in Chicago. But this is the grandmother of my profession. She started the first retirement homes for African Americans in Philadelphia and did some of the first organized social work. You'll see soldiers coming home from war. They maybe lost an arm, a leg, a limb. Oftentimes, the soldiers will say, you know, they want to go back. And they don't want to go back for political reasons. It's the camaraderie for their fellow soldiers, that connection with their fellow soldiers. Last year, I was sitting on a plane next to a 4-star general, and I was teaching him these 4 sources of resilience. And he explained to me, he says, this is the #1 goal of boot camp is relational resilience. We know if they have that interdependence with each other, they're more likely to follow through. They're more likely to do what they're asked to do in war. And I was like, that is the most important motivator, X factor. The military has known this for 150 years, but we don't let every child in our education system understand the most important thing that motivates human beings to push through, to not give up when they have opposition, when they have challenges. Again, the military has known this for years. And I'm excited to see that, again, we're able to teach this to kids now very young. Because of time, I'm gonna have to skip a few of these. So that's the first place that resilience comes from internally, is this relational resilience. The second place resilience comes from is something called street resilience. And that is, you take the pain of disrespect, social inequality, and mistakes and use it as fuel to propel you forward. And it could be any type of disrespect. We know human beings will disrespect each other over height, weight, skin color. We see what's going on right now. Any type of disrespect will come up with to say, I'm more superior than you. And when we started looking at kids and families that had high trauma that were bouncing back, all of them talked about how the disrespect they felt, the inequality. Because of that, they did what they had to do. They used that as a fuel source to not give up, to push harder, to turn in their homework, to stay in school. For example, I was told I couldn't go to college because of my learning disabilities, my background, my challenges. And so I used that as a fuel source. I had a professor who said to me, Christian, if you can get a college degree, my degree is worth less. So I used that disrespect. I remember I walked home from school in tears after he said that to me. And again, there's no shortage of disrespect. One thing we see with this is when a person's identity becomes under attack. There's almost a natural fight in human beings when their identity comes under attack. You convert the pain into the energy to create productive outcomes. You direct your hurt and anger towards a cause rather than an individual. And we see this going on right now with these marches. And, there's so many examples of street resilience where people are creating productive outcomes and they're speaking out with some of the hate and challenges that are going on in this country. You have the ability to reframe your limitations, transform them into strengths. Mandela, which I alluded to earlier, powerful example of street resilience. Rosa Parks refusing to sit on the back of the bus is street resilience. Abraham Lincoln running for public office 7 times and failing. Cesar Chavez, what he did for migrant farm workers. His breaking point, he said he saw they were charging them 50 cents for a cup of water for these migrant farm workers out in the field. And that was his breaking point, and said, look, we're going to unionize them. This is crazy. They're being paid very little. And now we're going to charge them for water. And that led to the unionization. And then Michael Jordan, if you watch Michael Jordan's documentary that just came out, the entire documentary is about street resilience. What women make on a dollar, powerful example, breaking through. Malala, powerful example of street resilience, shot by the Taliban. And we know because of, she said, until the man who shot me, until his daughter can receive an education, I'm going to speak out. We know she got the Nobel Peace Prize. And I could go on and on about street resilience, but so imagine if every child you work with knew how to tap into relational resilience and street resilience. They knew what to do with their negative emotions. They knew how to flip the switch, and they saw the suffering as a fuel source. So to be resilient, we first have to have suffering. We have to flip the switch, ask ourselves, how do I use that suffering as my best friend? And if suffering kicks in, we're going to have negative emotions. So we got to channel those negative emotions in productive ways. And then we've got to be able to tap into our relational resilience and our street resilience. And then the last two I'll just highlight real quick is something called resource resilience and rock bottom resilience. Resource resilience is you're just maximizing your talents, your abilities, the resources around you. For example, I kept alluding to my nonstop talking, my learning disabilities. I was able to convert that into a resource. And so we have a whole system on how to do that. And then rock bottom is when you have every reason to give up, you're able to say to yourself, how do I use this challenge as my best friend? And so I have a whole book on this. This is a Reader's Digest version of this, but the book, The Resilience Breakthrough, you can go to our website, WhyTry.org, and the book's there, The Resilience Breakthrough, and you can access a podcast there at WhyTry.org. We have a podcast on resilience that is blowing up. We have lots of people listening to that podcast if you want to get more in depth on resilience and where it comes from. And we also have a free parenting guide to teach resilience too, that anybody can access off our website, this parenting guide. And so going back to relational resilience, the last couple of years, people would say to me, Christian, it's really hard for me to have relational resilience with people that I don't like, or people I don't get along with. It's really hard, or people who see the world different than me. And let me pull this up right here. I may have to have Jason. Let me see. I think I can find it here. All right, here we go. Hopefully it will pop up here. And I'll wind this up here. Let me see if I can get this to pop here. One of these. All right, here we go. Yeah, all right. I think we got it here. So let me just hit play. All right, here we go. Can you see that okay, Ashley? The slide there?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So now I want to talk a little bit about some racial justice issues here as I wind this up here. And I'll have Ashley jump in. And, And I apologize, it sounds like I may be dominating time, not letting Ashley talk. They asked me to go for the first hour. I do have a social awareness, I'm highly aware. And then I'm about 3 minutes over. So I'm gonna highlight this for 2 minutes, and then we're gonna turn it over to Ashley here. And we'll go to the bottom of the hour if everybody's okay with that. So when people ask me, how do I have a resilient relationship, again, with someone with a different perspective than me, a different worldview than me, different skin color than me, different background, culture, belief system, how do I get along? How do I have a resilient relationship with them? I have nothing in common with these people. They see the world different than me. How do I go about doing that? Again, I've already alluded to it. The first thing we have to lead out with is unconditional love over conditional love. We have to let people know they have value and worth from where they're standing with their perspective, their belief system, their culture, their background. We have to be unconditional. And then the second thing we have to do is to be okay with being wrong. And we have to realize that we can be wrong. When I speak to large groups of people, I'll say, write down the last 3 or 4 times you were wrong. And 90% of people I say that to will write nothing down, because almost one of our biggest human blind spots is pretty much 100% of people on the planet are absolutely sure their worldviews are right. There's nobody that gets up and goes, well, you know, I think my worldview is off a little bit today. I think my perspective is not true. 100% of human beings are pretty sure they're right. And again, I spent a lot of my life with that view, let me tell you. But at 50 years old, the one thing I know for sure is that most of my views and perspectives are wrong. And to give you an example, when my kids ask me questions about 100 different things, I'll tell them my perspective. I'll tell them what the educated world says about it. I'll tell them what the spiritual world thinks about a concept or an idea. And then I'll tell them my view, and I'll say, this is just the best I can come up with the knowledge I have, the information I have, my childhood, my background, where I was born, what I've learned from traveling 7 million miles around this planet is, and people always ask me, what's the number one thing you learned about traveling 7 million miles? And I hopefully it's not like I'm bragging, because I've traveled 7 million miles and met millions of people. I've realized, wow, most of my childhood and growing up perspectives weren't just a little bit off, they were highly off. But I had to travel 7 million miles to learn that. And I wish I had a magic wand. It could have everybody experience it. Trust me, I am highly aware of the privilege and the opportunity to do that. I do not take that in any type of for granted, but I also feel an ethical responsibility because of that experience to just emphasize that, look, one, it's okay to be wrong. I don't beat myself up when I'm wrong, because again, I'm more wrong than right in general. But here's the problem. If I don't ever see that I'm wrong, I'll never go to school on understanding the other side or the other perspective. There's no reason to understand a different worldview, a different perspective, if I cannot be wrong. If I'm absolutely sure the way I digest this world is correct, then there's no growth, there's no progress. What actually enables us to grow is to be able to question and to be able to say to ourselves, all right, where am I wrong? And maybe you could argue the scientific method comes in at this point and different things, but we have to be able to ask ourselves, because every bit of human progress has really come from asking ourselves questions and trying to figure out, why do I have this view? Why am I willing to hurt another human being, or whatever the situation is? It all starts with being right. There's a book, I think her name's Catherine Schultz. It's entitled Being Wrong, who wrote a book about this. One thing that really inspired me is Catherine Schultz. And there was a TED Talk that she did on being wrong, that if you just look up Schultz TED Talk, it's incredible. And it's interesting, they've actually done research to prove that humans are far more wrong than right, but 100% of humans believe the opposite. So, and that's a hard thing to digest. But again, it took a lot of years and a lot of humility. And I am the biggest hypocrite talking about this. It took me years and 7 million miles of travel to realize, wow, I have some massive ignorance and blind spots, not just a little bit. I have huge blind spots. And then this third thing we have to do is the ability to see things from, I argue, 3 or more perspectives, to see, you know, different perspectives, to have different views of something is so, so important. And but to see something from more than one angle, I can look at this water bottle from 5 different, angles or views or whatever. The ability to see something from more than one perspective causes us to be able to research it, to look at it. We have to go to school to understand another perspective, another view. It's interesting. There was a show, I think they called it 30 Days or something like that. I'm trying to remember the gentleman, but if you lived 30 days with the opposite perspective that you have, the research shows you would change that perspective. So whatever you hate or whatever you don't like or whatever view seems wrong to you, if you lived with it for 30 days, your compassion would go through the roof. And they've actually done research to show this. So usually what we hate on, we have not been exposed to. And that's just part of the human condition, because there's natural fear in something new or something different or something that we haven't been exposed to. Fear instantly raises its ugly head. And then the opposite of this, of course, is a rigid view. And that is, I will love you if ... I'll love you if you have the right skin color, culture, tribe, background, heritage. This is the biggest thing that has caused violence, wars, hate in this world. I mean, if we could solve this, we could solve most of the human problem. And then, the opposite of that, of course, is unconditional love. And then I'm right. There's no reason to research, to understand, to get a new perspective if I'm right. If I'm right, I can shut down all thinking. And it's just a natural thing for human beings. It's the easiest way to be lazy. It's work to put a mirror up. It's work to figure out where you're wrong. To figure out where you're wrong is one of the most painful things a human being can go to. I'm gonna be really frank with you guys. When I've really researched where I was wrong about things, it literally put me in a fetal position where I was sobbing my eyes out when I really learned areas I was wrong. I literally have sobbed like a baby when I've done that type of work. So if you haven't studied something that has caused tears to come out of your eyes, you're not studying hard enough. Does that make sense? We have to study another view, another perspective, to a point where we feel like sobbing, where we feel like, wow, I'm going to act different tomorrow. I'm going to change my life. I'm going to speak out and be brave when I will lose friends and family for speaking the truth or being brave. That's the level of study we have to do. And then holding just one perspective, my view, one perspective, and not looking at things from multiple angles, just assuming, hey, everything I learned in the first 12 years of my life is the right view for the next eon of my life, and I'll just pass it on. And so this is hard work. But if we're going to stop hate in this country, if we're going to work through social injustice issues, this is the hard work that has to do it. And we have, this is just the start of it. There's tons more strategies we have around this. We have over, 20 points on how to do these things specific. Because of time, I just wanted to highlight those. But I just want to end with the 3 R's of WhyTry. The first R is that relationship. The second R, and we call it surrendering the one-up relationship. The second R is relevancy. And the third R is resilience. And that's why, that relevancy is why everything we do, we want the child to visually see it, hear it in music, physically do it. And those 3 R's are so important: the relationship, relevancy, and resilience. And I want to thank you guys for listening to me. Sorry, man, I don't get on a soapbox this intense too often, but today, with what's going on in this world, I'm tired of dancing. I mean, look, it's time to be politically incorrect. It's time to speak out, tell the truth, and bring love and healing to this world, and realize we're all the same. There are far more similarities between us than differences. And that's the truth. And we have to start focusing on that. And we need to teach our children this. You guys are my heroes. And now I want to turn it over to Ashley, and I'll be quiet.
Thank you, Christian. We're going to have Ashley bring us home. We appreciate your passion. And Christian talked about a lot of big ideas. Ashley is going to instruct us a little bit on how to put some of these into practice. What does SEL, what does resilience look like in the world of a practicing counselor? And so I'm going to throw it to you, Ashley, and let you take us home on this. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Christian was preaching, y'all. So I was like, "Ooh, keep going." I'm listening. I have all my notes as well.
Oh, you took
It was
notes.
a I sure did. And I think that that's important. And I'm glad that I said that I took notes, because I think that the most important thing, if we're all, trying to be resilient school counselors, we need to have like a lot of reflection. There's so much happening right now. And I know all of us feel overwhelmed. And I know all of us are listening to Christian and just like, which one do I grapple first? One of the things that I've just noticed, and that I've taken notice since COVID happened, since, all of this, racial injustice and just political, just craziness has happened, is that we all as school counselors just need to take a step back and do some reflection as to, what do we really believe about people? I know I've gotten asked that question as a counselor in my graduate studies, like, what do you believe about people? How do you feel that people can change? And so I kind of translate that into being a school counselor. What do I feel about students? What do I feel about my staff? How do I feel that they can, make, positive changes and move forward when there's crisis is happening? And I think one of the things that we've learned, and I'm pretty sure y'all know the term, is that whole unconditional positive regard. Because I feel like when you have unconditional positive regard, you're going to have that unconditional positive love for others. And I'll just share with you my belief with all people that can change is that everyone has the power to do amazing things. I feel like it all starts for the heart. I feel like if I can help to ease the anxieties, ease the emotions that you have, then I can help your thinking processes, and then therefore your behavior change. And I know that sounds so like CBT, but that's just the way that I work with people. And also the way that I work with myself. I took a lot of notes here just for us as school counselors. I will say that before you initiate any of these 3 R's, like I said, and really find your way in the midst of how you're going to start your season, whether it's online virtually or it's in person, that you find your peace. And make sure that you are self-medicating and giving yourself some self-care so that you can stay afloat and you can stay level-headed. I know Christian talked about, things that we have to do with compassion, and relational resilience is really, really important, because you're not going to be able to really do as much work and make so much impact with your thousands of students that you have unless you have that support that you need. And so I will tell you to go out and find your cheerleaders. And I know that that's hard, because I know everyone's looking at educators, and we're tired and we're bombarded, we're confused. There's just so much thrown at us, but sometimes we need to stop. And sometimes that may look like if we're writing who's part of our support system, if we're talking to our colleagues, just trying to build a team that has the same purpose and have an action plan that's going to help to benefit our kids. Another thing I would say that just kind of goes along with the whole social emotional learning is that as you're doing your guidance lessons and you're finding innovative ways, like, y'all, I get it. Technology is here. I mean, we can't run from it. It's just something that we are just thrown in and having to do and having to adapt. But I would tell you to pivot and not panic. Just find ways, look online. Google's like my best friend. Find tutorials and things that you feel comfortable with using to teach yourself so that you can still do what you do best. And that may have been, maybe this last year, like, you haven't really been in technology, and maybe your best skill asset has been to have like in live person guidance lessons or just that one-on-one experience. And so now the challenge is that you have to move from that and grow from that, because our kids deserve that. And our kids need that, and they still need to see you. And so what we do is we do whatever it takes in order to get them there. And just as much as you're being resilient, like, I don't know this, but I'm just taking a piece, by piece, our kids are looking at us in that same way. We set the tone. Counselors, I say that we have the best job than anybody. We are the heartbeats of the school. So our teachers are looking at us, our staff are looking at us, everybody is looking at us, and how we move forward and how we cope with the adversities that we have. And so I want to say one more thing. I had circled that Christian said before Jason pops in. Um, uh, oh, I love what he said, that it's okay to be wrong. Um, when he was talking about that, I will say, just as, a woman of color and as a counselor that is Black, there are certain things, and I want to be transparent, with you guys, that I've had to check myself and have some self-reflection on some things that I grew up with and some stereotypes that I grew up with. With other different nationalities. I think it's the time, like Christian said, and he's so passionate, to break those barriers down. What do we believe about people, and how much do we love people, and how much am I willing to sacrifice out of myself to get some understanding? And so I challenge all of us, when we're using all of our three R's, our relationships, our resilience, and relevance in teaching kids, is learning to have crucial conversations and being respectful, but gaining insight and gaining understanding. And then the power of what you do with that understanding to move forward. I will share one testimony, and I'll let Jason kind of whatever else he would love for us to talk about. I remember, being in the classroom as a teacher, and I remember one of my students, she loved me so much, but she had this father that was really, really racist. I don't think he just liked anybody, but she said, "Miss Wright," she's like, I love you so much. I think you're an incredible teacher, but she was like, my father, he just does not like you when we're at home. He calls you the N-word. Like, he just does not like you. And she's bawling because this little girl just had so much love in her. And she's like, how do I fight that? Because you got to understand, some of our kids, from the settings that they're in, her resilience factor was really, really hard, because every day that she came home, that's what it was. And that's the reality for this year. That's the reality for, some of our kids, growing up right now, especially in this season. They're hearing a lot of stuff and they can't get away from it. And then if we're going virtual, just imagine how that's, filling up. And so one of the things I will inspire you as an educator is that I didn't give up. I mean, some people go off the deep end and just like, maybe tune her out or have something to say about that parent or guardian, but I don't know his struggle, and I think most of that has to do with my personal faith. But it was so funny, because every time you come to my classroom, and y'all know I am the most friendly person, Christian, I am like on fire. So I'm just like, "Hey, Mr. Such and such." And he would be like, but love wins. And he just couldn't, I just would not let him break that. I would not let him, break me, or just break this idea of whatever he had that was so irrational in his heart. And so I say this to say that whole year, I would, phone, he would, complain and have all these things, but I just kept fighting with kindness and fighting with compassion and fighting with respect. And I showed her that, and I was able to pour into her. And believe it or not, towards the end of the year, the guy actually gave me a hug. And so I know that, I know that that's big, but you have to think about those things. Everybody has, I'm not making excuses, but everyone has had different journeys. And so with that being said, as school counselors, I just feel like it's a non-negotiable practice and a way of being, and how we how we connect with our families, and how we communicate to kids that love wins. Hate doesn't win, love wins. We have to model that. And it's not just going to take one thing. It's not just going to take, I'm sorry, I'm going to throw this out there to school counselors, and I'm an elementary counselor, just kindness, kindness, kindness. We've got to be intentional, because the world is cruel, and the world is throwing a whole bunch of things that are overwhelming our students. And so when they fall, we've got to pick them back up and keep giving them the tools on how to communicate. We have to stay consistent. And so I'm not going to ramble and preach, so I'm going to turn it back over to Jason.
Thank you, Ashley. That was awesome. That was beautiful. What it made me think of, and we acknowledge we've gone a little bit long, but there's been a lot of really powerful information. What I think I want to conclude with, so you said some really powerful stuff, Ashley. You talked about the power of unconditional positive regard. We know from a therapeutic standpoint, there's great power. That's kind of that client-centered therapy model. When you dig into resilience research, what they're usually looking at is two main two main categories. They're looking at risk factors versus protective factors. And in the world of resilience, the most consistent protective factor that predicts and influences a person's resilience is actually the presence of a caring adult. And I think everything you described really backs that up and goes along with it. And it actually made me even wonder when you were talking about that idea that love wins, like even for another adult, the presence of a caring adult is the source of resilience. So for even, these people that may have hatred or ignorance in their hearts, when we communicate that we still care to these other humans, that we respect them as a human, I think it creates an avenue, a channel for resilience to take place. And what I think I'd love to conclude on, and I think it goes along with everything we said, I want to conclude with just like one practical thing. Ashley, would you mind sharing your virtual room, calming room? Because right now,
yes.
I think right now, conceptually, I don't think there's any disagreement with anything that's been discussed. I think one of the things that makes all of us as educators right now nervous is how do we put this into practice? And Ashley, you're one of the greatest examples I've seen of really communicating that care. Like when a kid's around you, they know that they have that caring adult in their life, in their presence. When a grown-up's around you, they know that they have that caring adult or that caring person in their life. What does that look like in a virtual setting? You've done some really cool stuff with some of your pre-recorded videos, but I thought this virtual calming room that you've set up is awesome. And I think it's a great way, a great example of how we can communicate and still be that caring adult in these kids' lives that we know is the most important source for resilience that we have. So I'm going to throw it back to you, Ashley. Let's finish with this. Give our attendees a practical tool, a strategy that they can use here in the fall in a virtual setting, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, so I know y'all probably been seeing this a lot across Facebook, but this is my calming room because, like I said again, Christian and I am a WhyTry guidance lesson person, cheerleader, all of that, like biggest cheerleader ever. And so I think one of the questions is just, okay, so how do I continue to reach my kids social emotional? How can I still build that connection? And so right now, what's popular are these calming rooms or Bitmoji rooms. And so that's me pregnant. I won't be after 2 weeks, so I'll have to change her out. But it has lots of different tools, as you can see, for kids to play with. Like my favorite one is like the Kinetic Sam. And if you notice, I know it's loading. And I got this actually from another counselor educator. It just has ways for kids to just cope, and I'm wondering if we could use like certain resources like this as we, are video chatting or constantly giving this to our parents. This is a book read aloud. There's a Legos where, someone can build certain things, a yoga mat. And so there's just many different variety of different things that we can do to give our parents and to give our kids just coping mechanisms, because normally, let's think about it, they would be coming to our offices and sitting with us and having, like their stress balls or, bubble wrap, which is my favorite, my kids like to do, but we don't have those. So this is where I say that we have to get innovative, and I know that it's hard, and I don't want to overwhelm you, Jason. I'm going to say this because it did take some time. I would tell you to start small. So if you only had like 2 or 3 things on there, that's fine, but at least you have something to give our students. And then also, I forgot to say, pass this on to the teachers. We need to share all of this. This is so important. Have a teacher make their own and say, hey girl, hey guy, copy and duplicate and make some more. I wanted to quickly, I don't know if it is show, but it was like, it's called the Bitmoji craze for educators. It's not showing right now. I guess it's not loading. But that is a Facebook group that has a lot of tutorials. I'll say it again, Bitmoji craze for educators. If you just put that into the Facebook and get on there, and they have tons of YouTube tutorials for you to work that out. And then Last but not least, Jason, I just wanted to say, because I know that with the guidance lessons, I hope that y'all really look into the resilience lessons and the WhyTry, because you could still do those online. I normally have made like a lot of videos using Christian's material, WhyTry's material, and I know that some of us are elementary. Primarily mine are for the third and fourth graders, and then I kind of tweak it a little bit for the kinder through second. But I think Christian hit the nail on the head where third grade is so crucial right now. So those kids that are in third grade that are going through this season of different change, let us just not stop there. So I hope that virtual calming room helped. Oh, and make one for your staff too, because I think I'm gonna do that for like staff members. Sorry. I think that's good.
That was awesome. We just had about 1 million people in the chat tool ask how they can build one of those, what the link is for that. We'll have Ashley send us some links, and then we can email some stuff.
Oh, we had one of our board members. She just put the link in.
Oh, perfect.
TSCA. So yes.
Awesome. So the chat's kind of blowing up right now about that. People very intrigued by that. I love the idea of doing that for your staff. I'm going to brag on Ashley a little bit. She did some cool stuff with some virtual parent nights too. We've been able to collaborate a little bit on. We've been doing a lot of parent work. Feel free to use our resource, the parent guide. You can find that at resilienciguide.org. And that's a great resource that you can include kind of over the summer for your check and connect piece with your parents as well. I think this is a great time to wrap it up. Christian, Ashley, do you have any parting thoughts on what we discussed today?
Yeah, I just wanted to read one resource. I was talking to Hans, the person who coordinates all WhyTry with me and stuff, that does this with me, and he said that we were talking, one thing we want to offer, that we're going to do this the first like 2 weeks of August. I'm going to give away 15 to 20 presentations. Usually I'm on the road in August, all August, but because of COVID, I'm here, and we've seen a tremendous response from our parenting guide, and almost 50,000 families have downloaded and are using it stuff, and we're willing to do a little presentation on the parenting guide. I'd have those out there know who Bruce Bushnell is. He's offered to do it with me for free as well. We'll explain the parenting guide to your district, or if you want me to do a 1 or 2 hour overview of WhyTry and the resilience, I'd be more than happy to do that. And if I do a district-wide thing, I won't be as, I'll speak out, but it will be more focused on the material. Today was a little more advocacy-oriented, but I'm highly aware when I'm doing something in a whole district and all that kind of stuff. And so if you want to do just a free event, the best way to get a hold of us is you can email Adam at whytry.org if you want a 1 to 2 hour presentation from me, or if you want Bruce to do an overview of the parenting guide, just let Adam know, and we can make that happen. And I can grab Jason if there's psychologists out there, more of a mental health approach. Jason would be willing to do a few presentations for you as well. And maybe we can even grab Ashley on some of these as well in the future. But anyway, so this first 2 weeks of August, it's going to get booked up fast because I kind of have room for about 20 of those first 2 weeks. So just contact Adam and let Adam know that, hey, I want a free presentation with Christian, and we'll make that happen. And don't miss the podcast. Please check out the Resilience Breakthrough podcast. It's on all of the things. It's free. The parenting guide and the podcast are free. So, and we're getting tremendous feedback on those. We have Daryl Scott was on there with me last week. I have an incredible therapist this week, Kimberly Boyd. And so just amazing people we've had on there. Judge Teskey has been on there. Incredible child advocates and people who are a lot smarter than me that have been on there. So I'm excited for you guys to hear those podcasts. And again, I want to thank Ashley. She's one of my heroes. Again, I can come up with all these ideas, but someone has to take them where the rubber hits the road, and that's what she does. Yes. And so she's my hero, and I want to thank Jason for what he's doing. And I just want to, you guys are involved in the most important work. You guys are my heroes. I know it's a tough time right now, and I'm feeling this nervousness. If you're feeling scared or nervous, your anxiety is going up, you guys, nothing's wrong with you. It's normal. If you're not feeling anxiety right now, I'm worried about you. And so you should be feeling some. But we're going to make a comeback. This is the greatest country on the planet, and we're going to keep fighting. We're going to work through this. The sun always comes through the darkest clouds. Thanks.
Ashley, final thoughts.
Final thought, I was just going to tell everyone to counselors, we are our worst because we're so busy taking care of everybody else that we forget to take care of ourselves. So if you have to cry, I'm going to tell you, go ahead and cry. If are upset or if you are frustrated, make sure you let those emotions flow. And then also, once you get through it, try to reflect on those moments when you're helping other people to really identify, how did you get through it? Were you feeling upset the other day? And sometimes I always do the exalt theory, where it's just like the empty chair. Like, what would I tell myself when I'm feeling this way? What words would I say? And so I just hope that everyone is not discouraged. I love counseling, y'all. Please don't lose your joy. Don't, remember your why, and just stay really, really focused. And we're here for you.
Awesome. Nice job. Huge round of applause for Christian and Ashley. Big virtual round of applause. Huge thank you to the Texas School Counselors Association. We love you guys.
Yay!
We appreciate everything you're doing. Ashley, you are an all-star. Thanks so much for joining us. We feel really fortunate to be able to have our affiliation with you, and keep doing great work. Thank you all, counselors. We know that it's nervous. We don't know what it's going to look like coming into the fall. These kids are lucky to have you. You're making a difference. You're doing the most important work in the world. Keep it up, and go out. Have a great week and great weekend, everybody. We're going to close it down. I'll put up a slide with email addresses if you want to reach out to any of us, and hope to hear from you soon. Stay safe, everybody.